Britain wants to take over India, the British East India Company.
Yes.
India was a bunch of kingdoms. The British land in
1600s?
1714. So 1714, a British ship sort of got off course, landed in Bengal. The king had a son that was sick, and the British guy doctored him up, and he survived, and the king was happy and says, here, I want to give you some gold. And the British guy said, you know what, I'd really like a trading post. And they're like, fine, okay. And so this trading post turned into a trading fort. And then the British had guns in the fort. And then the British would learn the politics, and then they would give guns to one of these Indian kingdoms, and then they would give guns to the other one, and then they would stir up animosity between them, maybe racial, maybe ancient, hatred that they had for, and stir them up until they would fight each other and bloody each other and weaken each other, and then the British could come in and conquer both of the weakened kingdoms. And they did this again and again and again till they took over all of India, a quarter of the world's population. And then you look at the British tried to do it in America during the Revolutionary War. The British went to the Indians and promised them money for scalps. And you scalp the Americans, right? We'll pay you. And it got so bad that it's listed as one of the 27 reasons in the Declaration of why we were rebelling against the king. It says the king has incited insurrection among us with the merciless Indian savages who are butchering the inhabitants of our frontiers, right? And so this idea is you want to conquer a country, you got to go in and find the divisions between them. And so when the Belgians colonized the Congo in Africa.
Leopold II.
Yeah, Leopold. And they measured their heights and their features, and they would classify them, you're a Hutu and you're a Tutsi. Well, prior to that, the people all just got along with each other. Some were tall, some were short. Hey, we're all just family. But now and then they made them go down to the government offices and register as Hutus and Tutsis and begin to identify with those two groups. And then they began to pit them against each other. And they began to massacre and genocide each other. And then in the confusion, the colonizing power could take control of the whole country.
That was even before Rwanda, the civil war in Rwanda. Correct. In the 1990s, right?
Yeah.
That was way before that.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this was the 1800s. And then you have a king, interesting, but Machiavelli lived in Italy 500 years ago. Italy was a bunch of city-states, Venice, Genoa, Naples, Florence, Siena, and they didn't get along.
Correct.
And Machiavelli thought, well, if one prince could control all of the Italian-speaking kingdoms, there would be peace. So his end was good, but his attitude was the ends justifies the means.
And at the same time, sorry, Machiavelli was who at that moment?
500 years ago in Italy.
Yeah, but he was who? Government official?
He was more or less an assistant of Caesar Borgia. And, Lorenzo de' Medici and all those rich Florentine families.
Pope.
And this Borgia guy was like wicked. He would do anything for power. There's even, rumors that he raped his own sister. I mean, he was like just corrupt. But Machiavelli studied him and wrote his book called The Prince. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, the ends justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is a good end because it'll stop all the infighting. But any means necessary to get there is justified. So if a prince wants to conquer a city and the city does not want to be conquered, they would hate him. But if the prince pays criminals to kill cows, burn barns, smash windows, set things on fire, the people will cry out for help. The prince will come in, get rid of the very criminals he bribed to create the problem. Nobody will know the better for it, and everyone will praise the prince as a hero.
From chaos to order.
Yeah, and so you have a guy in Germany called Hagel, and he takes what the British were doing, what the Machiavelli was talking about, and he makes it into a nice, neat triangle, right? Germans like to get things all organized. And so Napoleon conquers Europe, and the king of Prussia afterwards said, we got conquered so easy by Napoleon, we need to strengthen our state so that we don't get conquered that easy again. And he has a philosopher at the University of Berlin named Hegel, Hegel. And Hegel had a student named Karl Marx. And so Hegel made a triangle. One corner is a thesis, the opposite corner is an antithesis or antithesis, and the top corner is a synthesis. It sounds complicated, but it's not. You start off the status quo, everybody's used to what's going on, and you create a problem that's really bad, and everybody will panic and fear and cry out for somebody to come along and restore order. And then you have this philosopher king like Plato, right? Out of that chaos, somebody will come along and says, I'll restore order. I just need some temporary emergency power. And once the people give up their power, it doesn't come back. But then Hegel says, okay, that now becomes the new thesis. Then you create another problem that's really bad, and everybody panics in fear and gives up some more of their freedom to settle for an answer that's just half as bad. And then that becomes the new thesis starting point. You create another problem that's real bad, and everybody gives up some more of their freedom to settle for an answer that's just half as bad. And you begin to move across the page from the people being free to the people surrendering all their power to the government. And so Karl Marx said, well, how do you create a problem that's real bad? You send in agitators, agent provocateurs, community organizers, labor organizers. Their job is to go into a country, observe all the groups, and pit them against each other. And so Karl Marx, the first division was the proletariat versus the bourgeois, which is the working class versus the business owners.
The rich.
And you would stir them up to fight, and then they would overthrow the elites and royalty, and then they would. And so it got to the place where some countries, they didn't have a division there, so they would make the division based on religion.
Countries like what?
You'd have the Sunni, the Shia, the Orthodox. You would have, Bosnia and the Croats and the Serbs and India, the different tribes. And then they would base it on color, blacks versus whites, or Catholics versus Protestants, like in Ireland. Or Muslims versus Christians. Didn't matter who the two sides are. Didn't matter what the issues are. The goal is to sow chaos and division so that everybody panics in fear and says, government, please, please, please come in and restore order. And the government says, okay, we'll restore order. But in the process, we're going to take away all your guns. We're going to take away all your freedom so that we're martial law. You can't just wander the streets and we're going to have to track you. And you're going to have to give up your privacy. But and so this, Castro even said, when he did communism in Cuba, he says, the revolution needs the enemy. The revolutionary needs his antithesis, which is the counter-revolutionary. In other words, you can't get the people to give up their freedom if everything's fine. You have to create a problem that gets them to panic and fear. Then they'll give up their freedom to settle for an answer just half as bad. And so in the Bible, Jesus talked about this. He says, if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. Lincoln gave a speech during the Civil War, which says a house divided cannot stand. It's introducing an autoimmune disease into the body politic. What's an autoimmune disease?
It fights itself.
It's where your own immune system is attacking your own organs and joints. You got inflammation. You got fire. You got a war going on inside of your own body. Your body is fighting your body. And so the idea is you go into a body politic, a country, and you introduce an autoimmune disease. You get it to fight each other, and it weakens the whole country so it can get conquered. And so how do you destroy a marriage? Sow discord. How do you destroy a family? Sow discord. How do you destroy a church? Sow discord. How do you destroy a country? Sow discord. And so the critical race theory is so this is called the color revolution. All right, you want to go into a country and so after World War II, you had new countries happy to be free from the Nazis, and they're forming republics and electing new leaders, and they're climbing up out of the war, and the Soviets didn't like that. And so they would send in KGB agents to do critical theory, which is simply observing all the groups in a country. Ethnic groups, religious groups, economic groups, and then they would classify them as victims or oppressors, haves and have-nots. And then they would stir up the have-nots to riot. And then they would break it into bloodshed and killing. Why that? Because then people think emotionally and not logically. So instead of sitting down and talking logically about forms of government, it's like, my friend just got killed. I don't want to talk about stuff. It's that person killed my friend. And then people want to blame somebody for the killings. And so they get control of the media and channel all that frustration at the new leader of the new republic. It's his fault. It's his fault. He's messed up. And as his popularity falls, then they could do a coup or a rigged election, and nobody would challenge it because by this time they didn't like the leader. And then they replaced the leader with a Soviet puppet. And country after country was falling. It's called Behind the Iron Curtain. Mm-hmm. And so this tactic, Harry S. Truman does nothing while these countries are falling behind the Iron Curtain in the 1950s for the 48, 49, and 50s. And the next president is, because Truman started the United Nations, and Truman said, we're going to let the United Nations work. And the Soviets had somebody on the Security Council of the United Nations. So they knew everything that was going on. It's like,